Story 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. My friends and I were driving late one night on a deserted highway. It was one of those roads that seems to stretch on forever. No lights, no signs, just blackness all around, interrupted only by the weak glow of our car's headlights. We had been driving for hours, and fatigue was setting in. That's when we saw her, a young woman standing on the side of the road, soaked to the bone and waving frantically. We all exchanged uncertain glances, but decided to stop. As we pulled up beside her, she rushed over, shivering and looking terrified. "Please, can you help me?" she pleaded. My car broke down a little ways back. I just need a ride to the next town. I felt a pit in my stomach. Something seemed off, but she looked so desperate, so helpless that we couldn't just leave her there. We told her to get in, and she sat in the back seat, her wet clothes leaving dark stains on the fabric. As we drove, she explained that she had been driving alone when her car broke down and that she'd been trying to flag someone down for hours. After a few minutes of silence, she started to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. We asked if she was okay, but she didn't answer. Then, without warning, she let out a guttural sob, and when I looked back, she was gone. Just gone. No sound, no flash of light, just an empty back seat. We slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop in the middle of the road, our hearts racing. We sat there in shock for a moment before noticing the faint glow of emergency lights up ahead. As we approached, we saw it, a car wreck. A mangled vehicle lay crumpled in a ditch on the side of the road. A police officer waved us down and we pulled over, still shaken. "Did you see anything unusual back there?" he asked. We hesitated, but I told him everything, the woman, her sudden disappearance. He looked at us for a long moment before finally saying, "A young woman died here a few months ago, hit by a car in this exact spot. You're not the first ones to see her. I still get chills thinking about it." We left that place as fast as we could and never spoke of it again. Story 2. The Unmarked Grave. My buddy and I were on a road trip aiming to make it cross-country in a week. We were taking turns driving, and it was his turn to take the wheel. I was dozing in the passenger seat when he decided to take a detour to avoid a traffic jam on the main highway. Before I knew it, we were on a narrow, winding road in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense trees and darkness. After hours of driving, we both needed a break, so we pulled into a small, isolated rest area. The place was eerie, just an old bathroom, a few benches, and nothing else for miles. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. As I stretched my legs, I noticed something odd near a cluster of bushes, a mound of dirt that looked freshly disturbed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I knelt down to inspect it. I started brushing away the loose dirt with my hands, and that's when I saw it. What looked like a bone, a human bone. I felt my stomach drop. I called my friend over, and we both just stared at it in disbelief. We didn't know what to do. We were miles from anywhere, and our phones had no signal. Panic set in, and we decided to leave immediately, driving as fast as we could. We found a gas station about an hour later and called the police, telling them what we had found. A few days later, we saw a news report about it. The police had found the remains of several bodies buried in shallow graves at that rest area. They suspected it was the work of a serial killer who had been active in the area for years but had never been caught. To this day, I can't get the image of that bone out of my mind. We could have been his next victims. Story 3. The Pursuer in the Woods. My girlfriend and I were on a road trip through the mountains. We had planned this trip for months. A scenic drive through some of the most beautiful remote areas we could find. It was all going perfectly until we decided to take a detour through a dense, forested area, hoping for some adventure off the beaten path. It was late afternoon, and the road was narrow, winding through thick trees that seemed to close in on us. That's when we noticed the car behind us. It was an old truck, rusty and beat up, and it was following us too closely, almost riding our bumper. I tried to speed up, but the truck stayed right on us, matching our every move. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the driver, a man with a grim expression, staring straight ahead. We tried to lose him by turning onto a smaller gravel road, but he followed. I was starting to get really nervous. My girlfriend suggested we pull over and let him pass, so I did. But instead of passing, the truck stopped right behind us. I could see the driver more clearly now. He was getting out of the truck, holding what looked like a crowbar. He was walking towards us with a purpose, and his eyes were locked on our car. I floored it, kicking up gravel as we sped away. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. We drove as fast as we could, and he followed us for what felt like an eternity. Finally, we saw the lights of a small town in the distance. We swerved into the town's main street, and thankfully, we lost him in the crowd. We never found out who he was or what he wanted, but I still think about it every time I drive down a lonely road. The way he looked at us, I know he meant us harm. Story 4. The Creepy Motel Manager. I was on a solo road trip driving from coast to coast exploring parts of the country I'd never seen before. One night I was exhausted and decided to pull over at a small rundown motel off the highway. The neon sign flickered and the paint on the building was peeling, but I was too tired to keep driving, so I went inside. The manager was an odd man, maybe in his 50s, with a strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. He seemed overly interested in me, asking too many questions about where I was coming from, where I was going. He offered to give me a discount if I'd have dinner with him in the lobby. I declined, trying to be polite, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked to my room. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, feeling uneasy. I heard a noise outside my window, a faint rustling. I got up and peered through the curtain. My heart nearly stopped. The manager was standing there, just staring at me through the glass. I backed away, trying to stay calm, and decided I needed to leave immediately. I grabbed my things and slipped out the back door, got in my car, and drove away as fast as I could. The next morning, I turned on the radio and heard a news report about the motel. The police were investigating it after several guests had gone missing in recent months. The manager was the prime suspect, and they were urging anyone who had stayed there to come forward with information. I never called them. I just wanted to forget the whole thing, but I can't help but think how close I came to being one of those missing guests. Story 5. The Abandoned Car and the Man in the Trunk. My family and I were on a road trip, driving through a remote area late at night. The road was empty, no cars, no lights, just miles and miles of nothing. As we rounded a bend, we saw a car parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. We slowed down, wondering if someone needed help. The car looked abandoned, with the doors open and no one in sight. As we rolled past, we heard a faint knocking sound coming from the trunk. My dad, who was driving, decided to stop and investigate. He got out and approached the car cautiously, while my mom and I watched nervously from our car. He hesitated for a moment, then opened the trunk. Inside was a man, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with fear. My dad quickly untied him, and the man told us he had been carjacked and thrown in the trunk by a stranger who had stolen his car. He said the attacker had taken off on foot when he heard our car approaching. We called the police and they arrived about half an hour later. They took our statements and escorted us to the nearest town. We later found out that the man who had carjacked him was a wanted fugitive, and they never managed to catch him. It's terrifying to think that if we hadn't stopped, that man might have died in the trunk, and who knows what could have happened to us if the carjacker had decided to attack us instead.